Today's lesson is going to be about the civilization of the Greeks and the world of the Romans. Unlike the other empires that we've studied, like the Persians or the Chinese, ancient Greece consisted of a large number of small independent city-states. City-states were sometimes called a polis, P-O-L-I-S, and they were basically a community of citizens ruled by its male citizens. Female citizens didn't have any rights here. The two most famous city-states were Sparta, which was militaristic and run by an oligarchy. For those of you who don't remember what an oligarchy is, it's a government that is ruled by a wealthy few who support their own interests. The other city-state well-known then was Athens. It was especially recognized for its democratic institutions in spite of the fact that slaves and women didn't have any. The Greek city-states thrived and reached their height in the classical era of the 5th century BC. The century began with the Persian Wars, which temporarily united the Greek city-states so that they weren't fighting each other, but were fighting together to be victorious against the powerful Persian Empire. The Athenian Empire was really, really strong and growing really, really fast, and that meant that Sparta kind of took a beating and were weakened. And then eventually they were overtaken by the Macedonians, which were ruled by Philip II, and it put an end to the freedom of the Greeks in 338 BC. It seems kind of tragic and kind of short-lived, but for the most part, the ancient Greeks created a civilization that we base our Western society around. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle established the foundations of Western philosophy. You look at Greek poetry and drama even today, for they are basically the forms in which we take our own poetry and literature from. A rational method of inquiry, important to modern science, was conceived in ancient Greece. Many political terms are Greek in origin, as are the concepts of the rights and duties of citizenship, especially as they were conceived in Athens, which was considered to be the first great democracy. The Greeks raised and debated fundamental questions about the purpose of human existence, the structure of human society, and the nature of the universe that have concerned thinkers ever since. Unfortunately, the Greeks were unable to rise above the rivalries that caused them to fight each other and undermine their civilization. And although the Greeks lost their freedom to Philip II, Greek culture didn't die. A new age known as the Hellenistic era eventually came into being. That era began with the conquest of the Persian Empire by Alexander the Great. He was Philip II's son, and he vowed to avenge the Persian attacks on Greece, and so he was a huge military power during this time period. Within 4 years of Alexander starting this war, the Persian Empire was defeated, and Alexander continued to move even eastward into India. Eventually, his troops were just so exhausted and so many died out that he ended up dying himself during this war mission. So the resulting society that came from this time period after Alexander is known as Hellenistic, and it means to imitate Greeks. The Greek language became dominant as Greek ideas became influential. You had Greek merchants, artists, philosophers, and soldiers finding opportunities and rewards throughout the Middle East, and now a world of kingdoms rather than independent city-states. So people tended to come together during this time period. The Hellenistic period was, in its own way, a vibrant one. You had new cities that arose and flourished. There were new philosophical doctrines such as Epicureanism and Stoicism. Significant achievements occurred in literature and science, and Greek culture spread throughout the Middle East and made an impact wherever it was carried. Although the Hellenistic era achieved a degree of political stability, by the late 3rd century BC, signs of decline were beginning to multiply, and the growing power of Rome eventually endangered the Hellenistic world. In the past, you've learned about the Greeks and the Romans. Because of that, we're not going into full detail, but the things that I have written on the screen are things that you probably should know a little bit more about. So we talked about the city-states, which were a collection of people who lived in one area who had certain political power. The two biggest ones were Sparta and Athens. Sparta being militaristic, which meant the military basically ruled the way things went, and it was ruled by an oligarchy, which is a government that is ruled by a wealthy few who supported their own interests. The other important city-state was Athens. Athens was based more on democracy. Democracy is when the people or their elected leaders represented the people's interest. The next subject that we talked about was the Peloponnesian War. It was a war with the Persian Empire that temporarily unified the Greek city-states. But because the Athenians and the Spartans were fighting the Great Peloponnesian War, it weakened the Greeks and led to Philip II taking over. The culture that came from the ancient Greek civilization was the source of what we use today for our philosophy, our literature, our art, our scientific inquiry, and our democracy. So there were quite a few things that changed the way the world went because of how the Greeks thought and how they studied and how they created art. The last part is talking about the Hellenistic era. This started because Alexander the Great, who was son of Philip II, conquered the Persian Empire and said that that era was then to be known as the Hellenistic era. And basically what it did was, as Alexander moved east, even all the way into India, the Middle East was affected by Greek culture, and Greek culture ended up spreading, and it gave rise to new cities, new philosophies, and literary and scientific achievements. Your next job is to stop this recording and answer the question, in what ways did Greek culture lay the groundwork for Western culture? The next section we're going to talk about is the world of the Romans. Sometime in the 8th century BC, a group of Latin-speaking people built a small community called Rome on the Tiber River in Italy. Between 509 and 264 BC, this city expanded and united almost all of Italy under its control. Roman diplomacy was as important as its armies in achieving this goal. Roman rule was made acceptable by allowing local autonomy and gradually granting Roman citizenship to non-Romans. During this time of conquest, Rome also developed the political institutions of a republic, ruled by an aristocratic oligarchy. Rome had no master plan for expansion. Its relationship with its neighbors outside of Italy soon led to involvement in new wars. Its first challenge was Carthage. This was located in Spain and Africa. After 3 long and bloody Punic Wars, Rome was victorious. In the east, Rome conquered Macedonia and also took control of the Greek states. Between 264 and 133 BC, Rome expanded to the west and east and became master of the Mediterranean Sea. Rome's republican institutions proved to be inadequate for the task of ruling an empire. In the breakdown that ensued, ambitious individuals such as Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar saw opportunities for power unparalleled in Roman history and succumbed to the temptations. At the beginning of the 1st century, military reforms had made it possible to create professional armies that were loyal to the general who recruited them rather than to the state. This caused a bloody civil war, and powerful individuals jockeyed for power. Peace was finally achieved when Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra. After a series of bloody civil wars, Octavian, who came to be known by the title of Augustus, created a new order that became the Roman Empire. He did not declare the Republic dead and continued to give the Senate a role in governing, but most of the political power remained in the hands of Augustus. He became the first Roman emperor. The army swore loyalty to him, and the return of peace soon made the new political order acceptable to most people in the empire. In the 2nd century, 5 good emperors continued to rule the Roman Empire. These good emperors maintained a period of peace and prosperity in which trade flourished and the provinces were governed efficiently. The Roman Empire developed a remarkable series of achievements that proved to be a huge asset to the future people of not only Rome, but also the New World. These achievements were fundamental to the development of Western civilization. This civilization consisted largely of lands in Europe, which were conquered by the Romans. Roman culture and political ideas eventually spread to these areas. The Romance languages of today, which are French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, and Romanian, are based on Latin, which was the official language of Rome. Western practices of impartial justice and trial by jury, most of that is owed to the Romans, who did that through Roman law. The Romans left monuments to their skills throughout Europe, some of which, including aqueducts and roads, are still in use today. Other monuments provided models for public buildings in the West for hundreds of years. The Romans also preserved the intellectual heritage of the Greco-Roman world of antiquity. By the 3rd century, however, the Roman world was suffering an era of decline. Generals fought each other in civil wars. German tribes and Persian armies invaded the empire. They had plagues, which made the population decline, and it created economic problems. And at the same time, Christianity was spreading throughout the empire. Like Judaism, Christianity was monotheistic, which means believing in one God. Beginning among the followers of Jesus of Nazareth, Christianity, with its promise of salvation and its ability to be a religion for all, it slowly gained acceptance in Rome. Rome's last 200 years as Christianity, with its ideals of spiritual equality and respect for human life, grew, a slow transformation of the Roman world took place. Many aspects of the Roman world continued, but a new civilization was emerging that carried on another stage in the development of human society. Some of the things that need to be focused on as far as the world of Romans, the guiding question is, what characteristics define Roman rule? So you should be able to answer that question by the time you're finished this section. The rise of Rome, through diplomacy and military force, the city of Rome unified almost the entire Italian peninsula under its rule, and it developed into a republic which was ruled by an oligarchy of aristocrats. The next section that you really need to focus on is how they went from a republic to an empire. So Rome defeated Carthage in the Punic Wars, and in that case conquered Macedonia, Greece, and other territories, and so they literally ruled the entire Mediterranean world. The problems of ruling so big of a domain is that they couldn't really control all the parts at once, so there were a lot of civil wars that eventually led to the Roman Empire under Augustus. Their cultural legacy was that they gave their language, their culture, their political and legal institutions to the Western civilization that we still enjoy today. They also preserved and passed on the achievements of the Greek civilization. A series of misfortunes, including civil wars, plagues, economic problems, invasions from Germanic peoples and the Persians, weakened the Roman Empire, and at the same time, Christianity was spreading throughout the empire. Although the Western Roman Empire fell in AD 476, the new civilization that emerged in Europe retained many aspects of Rome. The question that you need to stop and ask yourself now and write a response to is, what effects would the geography of Greece and Rome have had on trade?